Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, depending where you are in the world, because you are connected today from many countries. I'm Julien Marcel. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Box Office company, and I'm very happy to host with our Box Office Pro team this first icta technology reboot camp. Good morning, Frank.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody. Before starting this seminar, I would like to take a moment to recognize our sponsor for this session today. Dolby is once again sponsoring this Box Office Pro live session. Thanks a lot to the team at Dolby. I think on top of this image of Dolby, you can download this page that will give you access to specific links to the Dolby shutdown documents with very important and useful link there. And here with us today to represent Dolby, let me bring on stage Beth Fig, the Senior Sales Manager in North America for Dolby. Let's see if it works and if we manage to get Dolby on screen.
Good morning, Julian. Or good afternoon, Julian. Depending on where you are. I appreciate being here. Depending on where in the world you are. I appreciate being here. Hello, everyone. My name is Beth Figge, and I'm Senior Sales Manager at Dolby Laboratories. We at Dolby look for ways to help our industry partners to maintain equipment during the shutdown. We have a document available online to assist you. A link will be provided at the end of this message, or simply contact us at cinemasupport@dolby.com. We don't want to dive too deeply into the details of the document, as Frank Tees will be covering this more in depth during this discussion. One of the areas of concern that we've identified is that cinemas will need to test encrypted playback to ensure that their servers are working correctly before reopening. This may be difficult as keys for previously played content have expired, and new content keys are generally not available until the cinema is close to reopening. It is important to test servers prior to reopening to determine if there are any hardware issues or if replacements are needed. The ability to initiate a repair or exchange hardware a week or more before opening the cinema allows time to remedy equipment problems. To assist you, we've created the Dolby Encrypted Content Tester. This is an encrypted trailer that is available on our customer portal. We have generated keys for over 115,000 Dolby media blocks and hosted the playback keys online, allowing users to test whenever they want. The content is 2D, and we've compressed the image to keep the delivery file size low. For audio, this content has Dolby Atmos and Dolby Surround 7.1 audio tracks and can be played with any cinema processor. Dolby is committed to the cinema industry and our partners, and we hope that together we will be providing amazing experiences to the movie-going public in the very near future. We appreciate you and all of your efforts, and we're pleased to support the icta and Box Office Pro. I hope to see you all in person soon. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Beth. As promised, here is the slide. Let me now introduce Rebecca to host this session and welcome our guest. Thanks again, and thank you, the icta, for letting us do this very important seminar with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. My name is Rebecca Pauley. I'm the Deputy Editor at Box Office Pro, and I want to thank you all for tuning into the first session of the icta's Cinema Technology Reboot Camp webinar series. Of course, I'd like to thank the icta, who we at the Box Office Company are thrilled to partner with to present this panel on getting all the important technical elements of your movie theaters back up and running. A few logistical items before we start. Obviously, everyone's using the chat function, which is great. Just a reminder, everybody keep it nice, keep it polite. I don't expect that anyone is coming into this session ready to throw down, but just in case, keep it friendly. And as Julian mentioned, we have the question tab. There will be a Q&A at the end of this session. So if you do have questions, please pop them in there. And even if you don't have questions, I'd recommend you go in there and upvote anything that you want to know the answer to get it bumped up the queue. And finally, if you're having any technical issues, audio, video, anything like that, I'll quote the sitcom The IT Crowd, just try and turn it off and on again, AKA refresh your page. That usually works. So with that, I will turn it over to Frank of Moving Image Technologies and, of course, the ICTA to moderate this panel. Frank, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Frank Tees, as was said. I'm Vice President of the ICTA, as well as Vice President of Technical Sales Support for Moving Image Technologies. So if we can get to the presentation, we'll move forward with the topics for today. So first off, a quick note on ICTA and what we are. The ICTA is a global network of professionals in the motion picture industry. Members of the ICTA are those professionals and companies that manufacture, service, create, sell, and use cinema equipment. And our members are on the cutting edge of new technologies and have been the driving force in a lot of the developments in cinema. We promote technological advancements and educational seminars and programs, and we stand for excellence and professionalism in the industry. So all of the members of the ICTA consider all of our partners in cinema exhibition, content, service, manufacturing, innovation, and support, not only our friends, but part of our family. We are all here for you and each other during this intermission in our business and lives, and we eagerly hope to see you all as the curtain rises again in your theaters, at trade shows, and in person coming soon. So about today's format, we'll be addressing restoring your cinema to service, things to look for, and troubleshooting of simple items, and when to ask for help. We have a panel of experts that are going to be covering projectors, servers, both SMS and TMS, audio systems, screen, and point of sale. Please present your questions in the Q&A pane, and we'll address as many as possible during the live Q&A. And all of today's videos will be posted on our website and our Facebook page. You can visit our page or like our Facebook page, and we'll continue with these seminars throughout the summer. Before we start, we'll be providing general technical information in a summary format. We're not going to go too deep into anything, although it may seem like it. This is in order to point kind of everybody in the right direction for those who may not have the technical knowledge. But a disclaimer: do not proceed beyond your technical abilities or comfort level. Ask for help. Call your servicer. Call your NOC or your technical resources if needed. The information is not intended to supersede your company policies, your business practices, or any local law for access, but to act as a guide should you need it. And we're doing the best we can to cover a broad range of topics. We're not going to be able to cover everything during this webinar, but we will be able to answer questions. So feel free to answer or send some questions our way via the Q&A pane. So next we have Projector Power Up with Dan Ruppel. We'll be continuing with our videos on these topics.
Give us a second here as we just queue up the video, which will start shortly.
Frank, do you want to sing a song for us or anything?
Sure, I can stand up and dance as well. So there we go.
Hello, everyone. I'm here at the Technology Reboot Camp, and I'm here with Dan Ruppel, Director of Field Services for Strong Technical Services. And he's going to be going over with us today projector power-ups. Good to see you, Dan.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks for having me. Thanks to the folks at ICTA and the folks at Box Office Pro for hosting this, and look forward to getting the industry back on board and theaters opening up real soon here. So,
all right. So, what are some of the first things we can do to get these projectors powered up?
All right, so we're going to start with projector power-ups. Our first slide is booth environment and general practice. Before we actually start to power up the projection systems and get everything tested, there's a few things environmentally that we should probably go through beforehand. So prior to powering up your cinema equipment, ensure that the booth climate is set to operating temperature and all exhaust systems are operating. Ideally, we're going to go through at that point in time after everything's up to temperature and inspect the large projector compartments. Check for water damage, check for animal intrusion, check for any chewed wiring, any debris that's been brought in from rodents or anything like that. We're going to want to get that stuff cleaned up. Obviously, based on comfortability, clean out what you can. If you're not comfortable, always feel free to reach out to your local cinema service provider, and they can come in and do that work for you. Outside of that, we're going to want to check air filter conditions, coolant levels. In the event that you have a xenon lamp set up, you're going to want to check and make sure that the xenon lamp is properly installed and ready to go before you fire that up. So in most of our general discussions with the manufacturers, it's been, a general consensus of 48 hours prior to testing that everything should be powered on. I think looking at this from the bigger perspective, we're probably looking at a week or maybe longer, just from a standpoint of we want to make sure that you guys have every opportunity to get your equipment up to speed. If you should run into any issues, having the ability to get parts, having the ability to get your cinema service provider field technicians out to do service work for you, preventative maintenance, and so on. So a majority of this stuff can be gone through at the booth level, but if you're uncomfortable with any aspect of this process, please consult your cinema service provider or manufacturer to request assistance.
All right, great. Can we go into the projector-specific items?
Absolutely. So we have projector-specific items from Christie, Cinionic, NEC, and Sony. As many of you know, the Christie, NEC, and Cinionic Barco projectors are all DLP-based equipment. So a lot of this stuff is going to be redundant. So I'll try to get through as much of this stuff as I can as quickly as possible. Obviously, we want to follow all previous general practices and environmental steps. From there, we're going to want to check and secure, make sure that all power cables have been secured, all circuit breakers are turned on and working properly. Once you get to that point, you can power on the equipment, bring it out of standby if necessary, and once the equipment is all green, then you can start to move along with the testing. You're going to want to check alignment, calibrate colors and brightness as needed and as time allows, and then ultimately move on to verifying encrypted content and functionality of all your automation. We have some links at the end of the presentation that are going to point you both to the individual manufacturer mandates, but also to encrypted content and some content that's going to be available to test right up until it's available from the actual exhibitors. So Chrissy did put in some specific stuff about laser projection models. They are requesting a minimum of 24 hours of stable temperature and humidity prior to operation. Outside of that, the general consensus is, powering the equipment up every 7 days for a duration of about 3 hours. That's going to give you ample time to get the internal batteries charged up and basically just, run through of operation. On the Christie CB2000ZX, M, Solaria 1, and Solaria 1 Plus, it's recommended that these units be powered on every 3 days if they have an IMB Series 2. So at this point in time, we'll move on to Cinionic Barco. Cinionic Barco touched on the fact that this is a prime opportunity to get as much preventative maintenance done as possible. The theaters are empty, so there's no better time than now to perform maintenance A and B, to get filters clean, get lens surfaces clean, clean port windows, vacuum out the projector completely, and really go through a full calibration of everything from top to bottom. One of the things that you're going to want to make sure of throughout doing the sequential power-ups, the every 7 days or every 3 days, Make sure that your real-time clock, ICP clocks, make sure that the NTP time server, that those are syncing up properly. In some cases, if the time drift gets more than 6 minutes, you might be required to replace an ICP board. So if you notice any errors like that, please reach out to your NOC service provider or the individual manufacturer. On the NEC side, again, general follow-up for the practice or general practice items. They touched specifically on some of the items as far as the Gore board for the Series 1 and the Enigmas for the Series 2s. Typically, those batteries last about 6 months. Hopefully we're not going to get to that point. We're trending at just a few months right now, and we're hoping that this shouldn't become an issue moving forward. So similar process, powering up. Once you get to the status, make sure everything's green before moving forward, and then general checks of alignment, color calibration, and verifying KDMs. On to Sony. As most of you know, Sony is a little bit different in the way that they are built versus the DLP systems. Most Sony equipment is going to have a UPS in place. Sony recommends to power up the UPS 48 hours prior to testing to ensure proper charging of the batteries. One of the primary focuses for auditoriums that have 3D is to check 3D convergent as well as all the other alignment. So with the Sony units, they don't have typically a standalone server. So you're going to want to check hard drive status on all of the Sony equipment, as well as the chiller status on the 815. Some of the specific information for that is to inject distilled water and run for 15 minutes, check the flow rate, visually check the system to make sure that it's not dirty, and if it's dirty, perform manual cleaning. If any of this happens and you're not comfortable with it, as previously stated, please feel free to reach out to the Sony Network Operations Center or your local field service provider.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dan. I think, with the links here, when we show them, I think the big key takeaway here is that please give yourself adequate time to go in, clean things up, power things up, get some good checks in there, just in case we have a need for service, to call your service provider or your NOC for them to address it accordingly. So that's Dan Ruppel with Strong Technical Services. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank.
All right.
Okay, next we'll be going into servers. There I am. So we'll be going into both SMS and TMS. It's a little bit thick as far as the content, but there's a lot to cover. So we'll be going into the video shortly.
Hello, everyone. In this section of the Technology Reboot Camp, we're joined by Kobe Bone, who's CEO of Tri-State Digital Cinema Services, and he's going to go over server SMS and TMS rebooting procedures. Kobe, thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it. This is an exciting time and helping everybody out. We're all in the same boat together, so I'm excited.
All right. So what can we do with the servers? What do you got to look for when we reboot servers?
Well, let's see here. On this, when you are rebooting the servers and the TMS, you want to make sure that everything's connecting. And on my next slide here, we kind of go through that. You definitely want to make sure that everything else is powered on, the projector, network devices, POS systems. You got to make sure all that stuff's done. It's a good idea to have the TMS on at the same time, so it can start syncing with the POS system and possibly start ingesting the times for the movies that you're wanting to show. Even if you're doing a test case, you want to make sure that the POS is transferring to the TMS. If you have any player servers using external storage, you want to make sure that all storage devices are powered on before you power on the server and the projectors. With the projector and the IMS models, with the Dolby IMS 1000, 2000, 3000, and the GDCs 3000s, 4000s, and the SR 1000s, they power on with the projector. So as soon as you turn the projector on, it goes through its process, and the projector and server should automatically marry. Once the projector is booted up, you want to make sure that the power to the players are on with the servers. So that means the Do-Re-Mi DCP 2000s, the GDC SA SX 2000s, and the XX 2000 ARs, along with the Dolby DSS DSP 100s and 200s, are powered on right afterwards. Now, pretty much everybody should know where the power switch is. The Dolby DSS DSP, once you plug in a power cord to the back, it automatically comes on. So you don't have really much to do with that. When everything powers up, you definitely want to make sure that you can log in and check for any warnings. Pretty much then is when it's going to give you, S&M warnings or different kind of connection warnings. If that happens, you can go ahead and start contacting your service provider, your NOC, whoever your go-to point of contact is. Some of the things that you want to watch for are definitely RAID warnings and connection and transfer errors. If something happens, then you can, if you feel comfortable and know how to pull logs, you can pull logs and pull them to your service provider, your NOC. You want to indicate the time, the date, what screen, and what the error was if you contact them via phone or via email. And then also you can call them and they can log in remotely. I know that some companies, even down to the technician, can log in and make sure that they're working with you or your screens that are having issues. You want to watch for SMS notifications, which could be anything from SM mismatch, missing, unable to connect, missing certificate. With the Dolby IMS, normally it's an SM1 LED that's on the front plate that pops up. It could indicate battery failures, loss of IDs. It's not connecting, down to the media block might need to be replaced because it might have not been powered down properly or powered back on and cycled the way it should be. So you want to make sure that those things are working. Watch for RAID drive warnings. That's all too common, especially after a long boot down period. Sometimes it can be worked around if you've only got one RAID that is bad versus one RAID drive versus 2 RAID drives. You can still play a movie. You just have to unmount it, which service providers should be able to help out with that, or NOCs. And then watch for device connection areas. You want to make sure that your projector, automation, audio, and closed caption devices upon playback are all connected, so that way it works seamlessly as the way it's supposed to. With the screen management systems, the SMS log retrievals, pretty straightforward. It's right there. How to do that, you just need to log into the system and you can pull it. But 9 times out of 10, most everybody's working with a service provider or a NOC center that can go in and do that for you. If not, they're more than welcome to, more than happy to walk you through and how to be able to pull that, put it to a thumb drive, and email it. So those are some pretty simplistic things. Once everything you've got powered up and it looks green, you want to make sure that you start doing tests. So that means you want to send a test schedule to your TMS from your POS. You want to ingest some content. You can do it locally from a CRU drive, or you can do it over the network from a satellite server, and then try testing some content. Pick a couple of trailers, move them to screen number 1. Pick a couple of different trailers, move them to screen number 3. That way you're not moving all the same things across, and you can kind of keep track of what's transferring, what's not. Then you want to make sure that you got the SMS tests are going good. So that means testing your automation controls, make sure your lights go up and down, your sound switches, make sure you can do all of that from the Do-Re-Mi or Dolby and your GDCs. Explanations are right there. You just have to execute the micro, do it from a local level, and then you can start working with the cues inside of the system, because you want to make sure it's working at a fundamental level first. And then, if you don't have masking, don't have to worry about it. But you want to test everything locally. And then after that, you want to do some playback tests. You can play, test with a trailer first, just make sure it works. You know, and you know, you can turn everything on, open everything up, turn on your lights, play a trailer, and then if you want to, you can put some cues in it. And then underneath that, test some encrypted content. If you don't have any encrypted content, to the side is a place that you can go and get some test encrypted content, put some cues into it, make sure it functions as it's supposed to. And then there also, you can test the content. If the test content is encrypted, it's all right there on where to download and how to test all of that stuff. Moving on to the next slide, you know, when to call a tech. Obviously, there's going to be issues. Hopefully there's not, and hopefully it's limited if it is. But if it is, you want to kind of see what's going on. I would write it down, write down the screen, write down the date and time in case somebody needs to pull logs. But you want to start, you know, calling your service organization, whether you wait and you test everything out and then say, okay, on screen 1, this is what's having problems. Screen 2, screen 3, whatever. You can do it at one time, or you can go line item by line item. It might make it easier for your service provider if you kind of put a honey-do list together and give it to them and let them work on it while you're working on getting the rest of everything back up and running. But content transfers, you want to call on KDM, doesn't transfer to one or more houses. Your screens aren't connecting to the TMS. Once it powers up, it should automatically connect. But if it's not, you might want to call and check. Your SPL is not transferring. If you've got any SM related warnings, you want to call, because then that way they can troubleshoot down to, is it software? Is it a player? Is it a projector? Is it hardware? You want to call and have them look at it, because they can start facilitating if parts are needed and letting you know that. Content storage errors, definitely call. Like I said, you can run on 2, but you can't run on 1. So they can unmount it so that way things aren't skipping while stuff's getting ordered and brought in. And then obviously playback test failures, closed captioning not working, which, remember, there's a lot of different parts with the closed captioning. So if you got headsets, make sure the batteries are replaced, make sure it's charged. Missing image, missing audio, or playback skipping, drop frames, definitely call your service tech. And then on the next page, we've got all the contact information for GDC and Dolby. Here list all the videos that is best practices if you're going to remain closed, or troubleshooting tips. They have very, very good content to be able to have that happen, and it works out in your favor. But you definitely want to make sure that you are calling and give yourself enough time, because it's already going to be stressful enough with everything else going on. The sooner you can get in and start testing and start engaging the different companies, the better you will be in a long run, because you won't feel like you're under the gun and under an extreme amount of stress. You can rely on your partners and your manufacturers and your service providers to help you out the best they can.
All right, Kobe. Thank you very much for all of that. That's a lot of information to digest, and hopefully it's not as complicated as it seems. That I think we'll get a chance, if you give yourself enough time, to get up on screen with your servers. Thanks again.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Okay, that's a lot of information. Thank you very much for everybody who is providing links in the chat for various technical resources. Very helpful. Once again, don't forget your captioning systems and your hearing impaired systems, and certainly test your on-screen advertising as you go. And it's a perfect time to go through and clean out a lot of old content if you've got the time to do so. So next, we're going to be discussing a quick trip through the audio system and Power Up with Barry Farrell.
Hi, this is Barry Farrell, Vice President of Cinema Product Development and Strategy at QSC, and we're here today to talk about restoring your cinema audio system. Thank you for attending this ICTA webinar. I'm sure that we're all looking forward to getting our cinemas back up and running. In general, sound systems are very tolerant of shutdowns. The supply chain for audio systems is global. There are a lot of shipments from factories to warehouses to other warehouses to end users, and the audio gear is likely to have been unused in a warehouse for longer than the COVID-19 shutdown has lasted. But this shutdown does give us an opportunity to take care of some preventative maintenance and system checks that might not happen when a cinema is running 365 days a year. So when turning on your typical sound system, you generally want to turn on all of the processors, crossovers, and booth monitors first before turning on the power amplifiers. That prevents any pops and noises that come from the electronics and line level equipment from being amplified and sent to the loudspeakers, potentially damaging them. Now this is a good practice all the time. You should always do this when starting the theater up in the morning. And for the reverse, when you shut the system down, turning the amplifiers off first will prevent anything from being amplified that might come from the line level gear when you shut it off in the evening. So let's move on to the loudspeakers. There's quite a few things that we can check on the loudspeaker front. It's especially a great time right now before we get the theaters open again to check for non-functional loudspeakers. This is especially an issue with surrounds and subwoofers. Screen channel issues are more often noticed by the cinema staff and patrons, but a failed surround speaker, it might be 1 out of only 6 on a channel, and it would be very easy to have one fail and have it not be noticed. So go into the auditorium, play pink noise into each channel in turn, and listen in front of each surround speaker to make sure that all of them are working. One of the things that you want to do when you're listening is to pay attention to sound differences between each channel. You shouldn't have a big variation as you move between the loudspeakers in the surround array or between channels of the screen channels. You know, if a frequency band is missing on the screen channels, take some time to find out why. If there's no high frequencies, maybe it's a compression driver that's out or an amp channel's not working. And as you switch from left to center to right, there shouldn't be a huge change in the quality of sound from the speakers. Check the subwoofers too. Subwoofers are very prone to physical damage because they're generally placed on the floor, and accidents can happen during cleaning. Stuff gets thrown underneath the screen and it can damage the speakers. And we've also found that subwoofers have been stolen. So this is a good time to check to make sure that the subwoofers are okay, and also to see that they haven't moved due to their vibrations. If they're on a smooth floor that might have a little bit of tilt, they can vibrate and move during normal operation. Using some rubber mats under the subs is a good way to solve that. Take a look at your subwoofer placement too. It's really best to cluster the subwoofers together and place them up against the wall. If you've got subwoofers that are spread apart or are placed well out from the wall, you're not getting the maximum efficiency from the system. And you could get coverage in the auditorium that's not as uniform as having them all grouped together. And as far as the screen channels, it's really a good time to check the aiming of the screen channels. If you have the access and can get behind the screen and get up to the left, center, and right speakers, check to see that the horns are still properly aimed. On some products, it's possible for the adjustment to get loose, and then the tilt of the horn can change, and usually it winds up with the horn pointed up at the ceiling. And you know, get up there, make sure it's aimed correctly, make sure everything's tightened down. While you're at it, check the wiring and any switches that need to be set on the screen channels as well. Make sure the wires are tight and connected. And you know, some screen channels have an option for 2-way or 3-way operation, or you know, you have to make sure that switch is set if you're biamplified or triamplified. So check that wire up there as well. Let's move on to amplifiers. The biggest issue that we see with amplifiers is that they get filled with dust and dirt. You know, amplifiers are fan cooled, and but to reduce the dust buildup, we use variable speed fans. They run at low speed most of the time to move less air and dirt through the amplifier. But given that you know, we see our amplifiers in use for 10, 15, or 20 years, it does give them an opportunity to fill up with dust and dirt. In an ideal situation, if you have the time and you're confident in your ability to do it without damaging anything, you know, taking the amps out of the rack and taking the tops off and blowing out or vacuuming out the worst of the dirt and dust and grime is a good idea. If you don't have the time and are concerned about your ability to accomplish without damage to the amplifier, you can just use a shop vac on the front and rear grills to remove the worst of the dust and dirt accumulation. This is also a good time to check things like gain settings and security covers. Some of our most popular cinema amplifiers are typically used with the data port processors, and that requires that the gain control be set for full up for proper operation. That's all the way clockwise. And we supply security covers with those amplifiers to make sure that it's not tampered with. So sometimes during the checkups and things like that, these security covers could get removed, and it's a good idea to check to see if they've just been tossed in the bottom of the rack, and if so, make sure the gain controls are set properly and reinstall those security covers to prevent any future tampering. Another thing that we run into on amplifiers is sometimes they're not set correctly. There are dip switches on a QSC amplifier and other types of switches on other brands that set things like the operating mode. Amplifiers can be run in a stereo mode. A 2-channel amp would be operated with 2 channels, or in bridge mode where the 2 channels are connected together into a single channel. And you need to make sure that the amp is correctly configured. Sometimes if you're not sure about that, you can check to see if there's an identical system in another auditorium and see what the settings are on those. But in any case, it's really a good idea to make sure that all of the configuration switches are properly set. With the QSC system, if you're using our data port processors, you also have to make sure that you turn off the high pass filter on the amplifier because it is taken into account in the DSP of the processor. So you don't want to have 2 high pass filters in operation, and especially on subwoofers, because it'll remove the extreme low bass. Moving on to things like processors and crossovers, we find that the most common errors really is the incorrect level setting. It's pretty easy to check the levels of the main channels, left, center, right, left and right surround. When you're setting those channels, you can use a sound pressure level meter. It should be calibrated, and it should have C weighting and slow response. And if you're doing the screen channels, go 2/3 of the way back in the auditorium and adjust for 85 dBc. Surrounds are normally set at 82. And make sure that the fader on the processor is set at 0 dB or 7, depending upon the processor model, before setting those channel levels. Problems most often occur with the subwoofer setting. You cannot set the subwoofer level using an SPL meter. You have to do it with a RTA, a real-time analyzer. Once the center channel has been EQ'd and adjusted for level, then you use the RTA frequency bands to adjust the subwoofer level to be 10 dB higher than the center channel. It's the only correct way to set the sub level. If you have the sub set too high, which happens if you try to set it with an SPL meter, you'll end up overpowering and potentially damaging the subwoofers. You can see more details on subwoofers with our blog post on 9 reasons your subs may be failing at the QSC website. Make sure your presets are working correctly as well. The cinema processors have the ability to have different levels for things like trailers and features, and then you have 5.1 and 7.1 content that you should be selecting for. So make sure that whether that comes from your server over the network or comes from an automation through GPIO pins, make sure that that is working correctly. That's one of the big causes of complaints from customers due to volume. If you have this capability and you set it up correctly, you can set volume levels differently for trailers and for features and keep all of your customers happy. So that's really the most important things to be checking when you bring the sound system back online. There are some helpful links that you can follow. QSC.com, I already mentioned that we have a number of blog posts about cinema sound systems, and Dolby also has information for starting your systems back up. We're really happy to help you. If you have specific questions, please give us a call, send us an email. But we're very happy to help you get theaters back up and running again. We're looking very forward to having our customers back into your seats, and thanks a lot for attending this icta seminar.
All right, good information from QSC and about all sound systems, really the need to get in there and check things out, check aiming, check levels. It's a good time to do it. We will now be looking at our screens, and it's a great time to go in and check on your screens, make sure that we have the best image quality.
Hello, everyone. In this section of the Technology Reboot Camp, we're going to be talking with Matt Jahans from Harkness Screens on the considerations when reopening as it pertains to screens. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Frank. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, it'd be nice to talk today about some of the screen considerations when reopening auditoriums after COVID-19. And I think a lot of people will know this is a new phenomenon for everybody, and there's going to be quite a lot of questions. So I'll just mute my video and we'll proceed with the presentation. So to get going, I'm going to sort of talk about different areas. So first of all, an introduction to the COVID-19 situation, and that's from a potential screen perspective. I'm going to go through what to check for. I'm going to go through corrective measures. So what can we do about some of the things we identify? Talk a little about deep cleaning, which is quite an interesting subject, which involves the whole auditorium, including the screen. We'll go through that. And finally, an excerpt from our Heartlets video, and it's the excerpt talking about cleaning a screen and dusting a screen, which again, may be useful in this situation. So the COVID-19 situation, what do I mean by this with regard to screens? So the key thing here from a Harkness perspective is auditoriums have been closed. And the issue here is HVAC has likely been switched off. Now that's something we don't recommend. Ideally, we say to customers who ask, please leave the HVAC on, but often it's going to be off. We accept that. So what does it actually mean? So potential dust can be attracted to the screen, and this can cause static effects, well, caused by static effects attracting the dust to the screen. So this is something we have to be aware of. We'll talk about high heat and humidity environments. And that's key. You can find that in certain countries, certain parts of the world where that can cause an issue with no HVAC. That can lead to screens can be sagging occasionally, if the plastic relaxes. We do hear stories sometimes of moisture, and in exceptional conditions, you can sometimes get mold growth on the screen, which can be an issue. And finally, we talk about uninstalled screens waiting in tubes. And what I mean by that is you may have an exhibitor who's perhaps maybe bought a screen ready to install, to do an upgrade, something like that. COVID-19 struck and that tube's been sitting there for some period of time. So what to check for? How are we going to look at these types of things? So for me, the most important thing to start with is a visual inspection of the screen surface. What is it actually looking like? So that's pretty obvious. We go into an auditorium, get into the seating area, move at different distances, up, down, left and right, looking at the screen from different angles. What can you see? Is there anything? So is there any obvious moisture or mold on the screen? This is quite important to check. Usually if there's been moisture on the screen, it's to do with, as I mentioned, HVAC being switched off, but typically only for short periods of time. Say the HVAC was turned off overnight in a very warm temperature, the difference in temperature can cause issues. But if the HVAC has been off for a longer period of time, one would imagine that the ambient temperature would normalize over that period, and therefore it's not a problem, but something to look out for. So is there an obvious dust buildup? One might imagine if an auditorium's been left alone, the dust has settled from everywhere. A static screen can draw that into the screen itself. There could be a big dust buildup that's visible on the screen. And finally, there, I would say look at the screen surface itself. Is there any actual distortion? Has something changed? I mentioned about sometimes PVC can relax with temperature changes. Is there something obvious we can see? And finally, is there any other damage? Now, the last point's not related to COVID-19 as such or any of the effects of that. However, if an auditorium's been down, has there been any maintenance staff working in isolation that have gone in using the downtime? Has something been knocked? Is there something you're unaware of? Again, straightforward to look at. Now, corrective measures of all this. So what do? We've done the inspection. We've seen certain things. How are we going to address this? So if there is any moisture on the screen, the key thing is to let it dry. And for me, the best way to do that is by gradual HVAC introduction. So turn it on, slowly increasing it to the temperature and humidity it needs to be. The key thing here is the bullet point says is avoid manually trying to do that. If you have any patches of moisture on the screen, if you put a cloth on it and immediately start to rub the screen and dry it, any dust that is on the screen will be essentially embedded in, smeared, and will cause dirty streaks. And the downside of that, of course, is we're playing movie content. We don't want dirty streaks showing up during light scenes of movie content. Now, mold I mentioned earlier. Mold, it's not common, it is unlikely, however, it is possible, again, particularly in very high humidity environments without any HVAC. Now, the problem you get there, if there is mold growth and it's allowed to grow into the screen, particularly a coated screen surface, there's often not a lot you can do about that. It's actually grown into the coating itself. No amount of cleaning, even if you can do it gently, is not going to solve that problem. Unfortunately, that's probably a screen replacement, so it's something we don't want. Now, if there's any small marks on the screen, these can potentially be spot cleaned using the Harkness method I'll go through. And what I mean by spot cleaning on marks, something like if there was maybe ketchup or a small patch of cola on the screen. I'm not talking the entire screen, but little areas where they might want to be addressed. Now, if there are any signs of sagging, sometimes you can try, depending on the type of screen installation frame, perhaps a retension, if that's possible, can address that. But, exercise caution with curve frames, of course. If you put too much horizontal tension, you can put a belly in. But of course, when you're looking at this, wait till the HVAC is back on. If there's something very, very minor due to the change in heat over time, bringing it back up to temperature can cause things to go back to as they need to be. But do look out for that. It's something worth checking. And with regard to screens in tubes, Harkness will recommend that screens are installed after 12 weeks. Of course, if something's got stuck in a sort of COVID-19 situation, you may, of course, have screens being in tubes for a lot longer than that. Now, although we advise 12 weeks, and that's that is what we do stipulate, it may well be if it's been longer than that, chances are it can be fine if the ambient temperatures haven't been too harsh, or it's left out in direct sunlight or very dusty conditions, something like this. But to me, the key thing again is installation. Try the screen. Don't think it's suddenly dead just because it's been a bit longer than that. Install it, visually inspect it. The chances are it's going to be okay. It's not been that long necessarily, but just do give it that inspection. Now, deep cleaning's an interesting one. I do get a lot of people asking about it. And to me, there's three primary methods of deep cleaning. So the first one I always hear about is UV. Now, Harkness don't say do deep cleaning or don't do deep cleaning, but we would give advice of what potentially can happen. So when we talk about UV, the key thing here is it can age plastics prematurely. So be that PVC of a screen, be that seats in the auditorium, anything, we're all aware of that. However, UV, particularly UVC, we hear about being used as very effective for viruses. Potentially, if there's a sensible delivery method, it's good for the audience, meaning they're not present. UV, of course, would be dangerous if it was being deployed while the audience were there. So obviously, caution for the operator using the equipment, but one would imagine those sorts of users would be very familiar with it. So that's something that is a consideration. Ozone we hear about, people are asking, can I use ozone, and have that going around the whole auditorium? For us, that's a big no-no. We would really not recommend ozone. It's extremely harmful. And the key thing, it's harmful in very low concentrations. And one of the major problems with this is to do with lung inhalation. Anyone with any respiratory problems, this can cause an issue. And of course, COVID-19 is exactly that. So we would absolutely say stay away from ozone. Another one I hear about is chemical fogging or fumigation. Now, the thing here with chemical fogging or fumigation is which chemicals are we using? So you may have a certain mix of chemical which works fine. For example, I hear with fogging things like hydrogen peroxide. We hear this could potentially be okay. It may be good, but the key thing is to do some testing on this. It may work in one situation, it may not in another. A certain concentration could be very harmful, it may not be. I think the main thing really is, and I put a final point here, is I'd say contact Harkness for a case-by-case advice on this. So obvious advice might be, if there's time to do this, and I would urge people if they're considering, don't just suddenly choose one method and adhere this to your whole estate. Try one auditorium, try one multiplex. Does this work? Are there any issues? And the other thing is obviously the repetitive of uses. It may well be you do one UV treatment, one chemical fogging, the screen comes out perfectly fine. Of course, if you're doing it repeatedly, decide to do this every day or after showing, considerable repeatable treatments of this could cause more problems just because you're doing it time after time. So it's important to understand that. So moving on to the video I talked about, I think if we go back to things like dusting, we come back to spot cleaning. If there are small things affecting the screens, not too serious, there are things you can do. Ideally, I tell customers if there's not a real problem, forgetting COVID-19 now, just talking generally, do I need to clean my screen? Well, no. If an auditorium's kept in good, clean condition, perhaps your cinema's not by a big dirty factory or a huge motorway or something like that, it should be fine. But again, if there is a dust buildup, you might want to address that. If there are spot marks of ketchup, cola, whatever, it might be something you want to address. And the key thing with any of this is screens are fragile. Hardness screen surfaces are very good technical surfaces, they're very robust. However, they're still scientific paint-coated surfaces, so you've got to treat them with the due respect. So the video I'm going to go through next will show a very simple way of doing this where you can treat it very kindly. Excuse me. So here's the two staff members here, and there's a screen which looks very, very dusty with some spot marks. Now, how we would advise customers to clean this is use a long extendable pole, and we can advise people on this. And the important thing is with a very soft microfiber cloth on the head. So this, in theory, shouldn't damage the screen. Now, you'll see the first user very gently putting it to the top of the screen, then start to walk backwards. They're applying no pressure. As the pole gets lower, there's of course more pressure, so a second teammate takes the weight and lowers it with them to the bottom of the screen. Now, once you get to the bottom of that screen, you've got dust on there. So shake out any dust. Hopefully it won't be as bad as this big dust cloud here, but whatever's on there, shake it off so it's not on there. Then working out from the middle, carrying on, go out to one side all the way to the bottom, shaking it off each time, two-man team, then back to the middle and moving out to the other side. And this will take out take off any surface dust and get it off the screen you need. But of course, as you can see in the cartoon here, you can still have spot marks or cola, mustard, whatever it may be. So to clean these, you used to carefully use this with, I would say a bucket of water here, a very, very mild surfactant, something like a very mild liquid soap used to wash dishes, just 1 or 2 drops. And the important thing here is do not rub the screen. So you can see here, we're dabbing the screen very gently, not rubbing up and down or left or right. That could damage the screen surface. And the important thing here is to take your time. This could take 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, just gently going dab, 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 and over time you'll get off as much as possible. Now, if it's a very greasy coating, so if it was something that had oil based, if that's been on there for a long time, you may never get it off, but you can make a considerable improvement. And I think the key to getting these sort of spot marks off is to get there quickly. But the point here, we're talking COVID-19, it's less likely to be spot marks, it's more likely to be a dust buildup. But the video here just shows that there are ways you can do it. So I think, Frank, perhaps passing back to you now, I think I've come to the end of my slides now. But I think hopefully this has been useful for some of the users, and it is an unusual subject, I would say. So it's great to have been asked along to present.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Matt. It looks like what key takeaway here is, it's a perfect time to go through and evaluate your screens and ensure that they're in good condition. And these are good notes and points to be made for all screens out there. So thank you very much for your information, and thanks for participating in the Reboot Camp, Matt.
Absolutely welcome, Frank. Thank you very much.
All right, we addressed our screens there, and good to note about the different cleaning methods that are being proposed potentially in some of these auditoriums as we proceed with sanitizing rooms. So keep note of that. And next, we'll be talking with Alan Rowe and discussing point of sale.
Hello, everyone. This is the Rebooting the Point of Sale, Reopening Sales Channels and Reducing Human Contact. I'm here with Alan Rowe, CEO of Jack Rowe and President of ICTA, who's going to be going through these topics with you. Hello, Alan.
Hi, Frank. Thanks so much for the introduction. We've already been through some introductions and so on. We've not got a lot of time and quite a lot to cover, so I'm just going to turn off my webcam and get straight into it. So the POS. The first stage is going to be just trying to get back on your feet. Your cinema has been closed for anywhere between 5, 6 to 10, 15 weeks by the time you reopen, and stuff can happen. So the most important thing being to just get back on your feet. You can have any day of the year, you can be unlucky. You can have a hardware failure on the POS, on a cash drawer, on a printer, on a power strip, on anything. Every day it's a very small risk, but when you've got that many weeks, obviously it all adds up. So it could be potential hardware failures, network problems, ISP changes. It could just be that there's a 90-minute Windows update waiting to happen on all your POS stations. So just try to go in early, get that POS station up and running, days ahead, maybe a week ahead of when you're going to start selling tickets, and just make sure everything works, because you've got plenty of time to deal with it at that stage. But if you get to the day before, when you and lots of other theaters open your doors, then of course you're going to be running out of time, whether that's from your POS company and from your network company, from colleagues. So just test out what was working before to make sure you're back at that baseline. On top of that, you may well have powered down a lot of stuff which you wouldn't normally power down, whether that's digital signage or POS stations and so on. So that might be more likely to trigger an issue. You potentially had less or no heating in the building. And then, of course, almost all the POS stations will have been updated with new programs because of the changes relating to COVID. So just go in early, just check that baseline. Please don't leave it to the last minute to make sure that you're there when you're ready to sell tickets. From that, we then got on to implementing new and existing features. And I say new and existing because in some cases it's new things that relate specifically to COVID. In other cases, it might be existing features that are now required that you perhaps haven't implemented before. Now, the biggest item that most of us have been talking about with, and most of us, the other POS companies and the cinemas have been talking about, has been social distancing within the auditorium. So I'm going to spend longest on that one. It varies. Some countries and some states are saying, that there is perhaps an auditorium capacity limit. Others are saying that you need a set distance, say a meter from seat to seat when people are sat down. So it's changing all the time. Those capacities are going to change as well. It could vary by auditorium based on the size of the seat. So you're going to have from your POS provider controls around the number of seats that will be automatically put between people. That will apply on the same row, and it may well apply also in the seats in front of and behind people, as you can see in this picture here. Now, there's kind of two sides to this. The first one is the legal requirement in terms of maintaining that legal distance. And then the second one is what this does to seating capacities, which is unfortunately quite disastrous. So the way that people sit in the auditorium will hugely impact the occupancy the capacity you can get in there. This is similar to requirements that, again, all the POS companies have had to implement in the past to do with trying to prevent people from having a single seat between one another. People sit where they want to sit unless you restrict them. Now, as an example, if you have, say, a row of 12 seats by themselves, and you have 6 people, and they sit 2 on the far left, and then a gap of 2, another 2 and 2. Then you've got 2 seats between them. So if that's your requirement, you've met that, and you've got 6 people in that row of 12 seats. But in another situation, you could have 4 tickets being bought, and you have a gap of 2 seats. They sit in the next 2, another gap. That's your first 6 seats, and then you have the same thing over on the right. Just happens to be where people sit. Now, of course, the one relative to the other, you've got a 50% increase in terms of the number of people sat in that row. So you start to wander into this territory of actually needing to restrict or potentially wanting to restrict where people sit within the auditorium, which could have some customer service obviously impacts. But if the alternative is that you can't reach those seating capacities that you need to in order to make it viable, and that your cinema therefore stays closed a little longer, then I would hope that presented carefully to the customers that they will be understanding. So occupancy becomes a key factor. A lot of cinemas are doing things at the moment to do with having, say, an empty row between rows. But occupancy, people are often talking about, say, 25%, or they're saying, oh, if we can get up to things like 40, but it can impact a lot worse than that. If you have 100% of the seats to start off with, and you take out every other row, then by definition, you're at 50%. If people then sit in the perfect positions, and if you have 2 people in each group, just to simplify things, then at that point, you're right around 25%. Now, if you have to take off a seat on the aisle, that could change things. If you have to have a row of or sort of a column of seats that are empty there. But then if people sit in the wrong spaces, you're now getting well below 25% seating capacity. You could be getting down as low as sort of 15% seating capacity. So this is definitely something that needs to be considered. Now, so far, I've talked really just about reserved seating. Unreserved, unfortunately, at first sight would seem simple, but has its own problems. So it's all well and good saying, right, we're going to allow 25% occupancy into this auditorium and it's going to be unreserved. Well, we've just said that the occupancy of the room depends on where people sit. So you don't any longer have a hard limit on how many seats you have in the auditorium, because where people sit will determine how many people you can get in there. One example of this, if you have one person and the minimum that they can occupy, if you're allowing 2 seats between people, is 2 seats. That's their own seat. And the 1 seat next to them, if you then allow that the 1 seat next to that belongs to the next person, and that's part of a 2-seat gap between them, they have half each. So minimum 2, but then up to 5 people, 5 seats, if they sit in the middle of nowhere. So you've got this huge variation based on where they sit, but also huge variation in terms of the size of the groups. If you have a larger group, then they're each individually taking up fewer seats after you allow for those spaces. So the capacity of the auditorium is determined both by where people sit and also in the size of the groups that arrive at the cinema. So you've got some complexities around that to consider as well. These are all things which, as I say, the software companies have been factoring in. So, it's really important that you stay in contact with your POS provider to find out what's in there, find out about it ahead of time. You can put information out to your customer base to assure them what you're doing and what they can expect when they get there. Obviously monitoring it to try and make sure people are in the right seats. Outside of that, there's all kinds of other considerations as well. Refills might no longer be possible, so you might want to consider alternative drinks deals for customers, because you probably aren't allowed to take the risk of having something from the customer back behind the concession stand. You've got potential payment changes, and there's a lot of uncertainty. All the POS companies and all the cinemas were all trying to figure this out in terms of interpreting the legislation, and the politicians are obviously doing the best they can with the time available to them and the knowledge available to them, but it will continue to evolve. We've had, some, one governor saying no PIN pads, and then we've had, other cinemas who are saying, well, they don't want to give cash back to the customers. So it really does vary. Some are saying use the PIN pads, some are saying don't use the PIN pads. Contactless is great. I think MasterCard have said that they've seen a 40% increase worldwide on contactless in the first quarter of 2020. So for cinemas who currently are not using PIN pads, it might be time to really seriously consider that, because your customers might be demanding it. You could lose customers if you don't have them. So it's worth considering, if you haven't yet implemented the PIN pad technologies, to put that in. You then got the question around self-service kiosks. Again, split opinion. Some people say that they're, potentially going to harbor germs. Others say, well, it's a good way to keep people away from the employees, which obviously is critical. So it's important to keep an eye on what the specific laws and so on are in your area, in your country, because it is varying and it is evolving rapidly. There's also concerns and considerations around paperless ticketing. Again, going into existing functionality that all of the POS systems have. This might be something that you haven't needed to deploy before, but now you want to consider, because then you can have no contact at the point at the end of the hallway. There's also, even within paperless ticketing and so on, there are variations around people doing sort of self-check-in and things like that. So again, make sure you're in contact with your POS provider. If you're not getting communications, make sure that you're on their newsletter list and that you're getting that information as it comes ready. Those are some of the key areas. There's other cinemas doing things like curbside delivery, so that gives you an opportunity to get some funds in before your cinema opens, or in fact even while it is for many. Then you've got other considerations like people using time clock. You could have questions and so on around it to make sure that people don't have a temperature, that they haven't been around people who might be, that they haven't been in public areas, so you can get them all to fulfill perhaps that kind of thing first. Be aware of the unintended consequences. Scheduling, if you've got much lower capacities, then you might want to schedule the same film into multiple auditoriums, particularly when content is thin at the front end of this. You need to allow perhaps longer for cleaning. With scheduling, if an employee didn't turn up before, it was annoying to have the popcorn on the floor, but now it could be, you could be endangering, it could be, you need to make sure, obviously, that they're there for the cleaning between auditoriums, so that becomes consideration. Extending expiration dates, that applies both behind the concession stand on food, if there's anything there, but also memberships, gift cards, loyalty cards. Is there anything that needs to be extended? Otherwise, obviously, you're going to have customer service issues when people do arrive at the cinema. There is a sort of a bright side to this as well, though, in terms of, there might be space for new alternative content. So that's something to consider. A lot of venues obviously have been closed. There's a lot of things that need to happen and not enough spaces for them to happen. So there might be more opportunity to get sort of party rentals and so on going once these cinemas start to get open. And then a key thing is just communications internally. Make sure that that your employees understand what is expected of them, what is absolutely required of them, and how to stay safe as well. It's not just about keeping the customers safe, but keeping colleagues safe as well, of course. Equally, communicating with customers. They want to be reassured. So give them that reassurance, let them know what you're doing, let them know when you're opening, what to expect, so that they don't have surprises when they get to the cinema. But yeah, lots of different things going on in the POS, changing constantly, and like all features that go into POS, they will change once they get in the field, as well as we and other POS companies get feedback directly from cinemas, and things continue to change. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour of what's going on within POS for opening the theaters back up. I'll hand back over to Frank.
All right, thank you very much, Alan. That's Alan Rowe, CEO of Jack Rowe and president of the ICTA, with rebooting the point of sale.
That was a fantastic session so far that we've had. Thanks again to all the presenters that have joined us so far today. If you give us a little bit of time, we will open the floor up to questions and start bringing some of our presenters up on stage to join Frank. And my colleague, Rebecca Polly, will be assisting us in moderating some of this special Q&A session.
All right.
So while we get people back on stage here, I know, Frank, a question that came up in the question section, something that you said you touch on, is John from Screen Vision asked about on-screen advertising systems, bringing those back up. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, those are certainly a critical part of your systems out there. And when you get your test content, you'll need to go in there, create a show as you normally would. Even preferably through your TMS, and pass it on to your system so that you can check the entire chain of content within the building, and ensure that all your automation works, your lights are going up, or down, and ensure that your pre-show starts and stops as it is automated to do so.
Oh. There we. Oh my goodness! So right. I was gonna screw something up somehow. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for the information you provided. I'm very pleased that the complete director's cut version of the Harklets video has been shared in the chat. Everyone needs their Harklets. Sort of a general question that came up throughout this seminar is just kind of across the board in terms of checking calibration, in terms of audio systems. What can people be doing now once, I mean, things are shut off? It's just kind of maintenance things that they maybe should take advantage of this time to do it that they couldn't do before when a theater was in normal operations.
All right, Kobe, do you want to address some of those, or let's see, can I unmute you? There you go. Or Dan?
I'll let Dan start off.
Yeah, I think right now, ideally, there's a lot of time to get a lot of maintenance stuff done. It's ideal because we're not affecting shows. So as we start to bring things back on, obviously, we're going to want to do as much preventative maintenance as possible. As previously discussed in our slides, both mine and Kobe's, upgrades to the equipment, get with your manufacturer, get with your service provider, upgrade equipment to the latest software and firmware revisions, clean the systems, make sure your presentation is up to par. I mean, we're going to be in a very interesting situation where we're trying to coax our audiences back into the theaters. So the best way for us to lead is to make sure our presentation is top notch. So looking at those aspects, I think moving forward is going to be a huge step in the right direction, and as much work as we can get done ahead of time is going to be ideal.
I agree. This is a good time to get in there and do a lot of those things. What did you have something to add, Kobe?
Oh no, I mean, I'm right on with Dan. I mean, right now when the theaters are empty is the time to be able to get in, identify, make that list together, budget it against whatever the, needs to be done to get on screen. But, the more time you have, the more time you have for success. Chance favors the prepared mind.
Definitely. And the service itself is a long lead item. Parts replacement is a potentially long lead item as those, mechanisms start to start functioning again. I certainly suggest there's a lot of different resources for testing encrypted content. Dolby, the sponsor of the webinar, is also provided a link for their decked content, which is encrypted content. You want to make sure you're testing encrypted content. ISDCF has a link on their website to encrypted content, and Deluxe is managing the keys for that. I think Cinema Next had mentioned in the chat room that they have some encrypted and unencrypted content. The CST FNCF in France has also test content for checking systems. So thank you to everybody who is providing that, so we can check the full circuit of the system. So.
And Matt, there was some chatter during the Harkness presentation about the question of, whether the virus can stay on screens, how long it can stay on screens, et cetera, et cetera. You're not a virologist, but are you hearing? No, I don't know. Maybe you are. Hit the microphone. Are you finding from exhibitor partners? I mean, I would assume when you're cleaning the screen, wear masks, wear gloves. Presumably.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to be depend what you're trying to clean the screen with. So, as I said in the video, the actual screen surface itself, if you had to do what I call spot cleaning, now that's not COVID-19 related as such, but that there you're using very, very mild products, that's not an issue. I think the issue when you're talking mask and gloves and things, we're talking if you start to use some sort of chemical process. Then with regard to the virus itself, as you say, whilst I'm not a virologist, when you hear about different things about viruses lasting on surfaces, we hear things lasting several hours or maybe a couple of days. In my opinion, the reality is the cinema's been shut for weeks. It might have been shut for a month or 2 months or whatever. In reality, there's not likely to be a virus on the surface. That said, people are doing disinfecting, sanitation of the auditorium as a whole. And of course, as that, the screen becomes part of it. So I think as to equipment, cleaning the screen, yes, of course, it's just good practice to wear something. But I personally think the virus itself wouldn't be on the screen surface
You know, if someone say coughed on it, having not been in the cinema for weeks, would be my personal take.
Yeah. Even if someone's in the front row, I don't think a sneeze can reach the screen unless someone is seriously powerful.
Front seats are.
I hope they're not that close.
We have a comment. We have a comment from Mark Louie here in the question section from Alamo Draft House about stressing the importance for exhibitors of having someone designated to monitor the presentations, monitor the equipment. What's your thoughts on that, just operationally?
Definitely. If you can get somebody in there to have eyes on entire presentations and ensuring that both you look good and the content looks good, that's an excellent idea, an excellent opportunity, and to ensure that the systems that have been dormant continue to function automatically throughout the course of this reboot. Would you want to add something there, Alan?
You're on mute.
So yeah, I was just going to say, absolutely from a technological standpoint, and then also from a legal standpoint. Of course, all the POS companies have put this software to try and say where people should be sat for that cinema to stay legal. But all you need is for some people not to pay attention to that, sit where they like, and A, it could be dangerous, B, you could get inspected. So absolutely, I think enforcement checking and so on is key. Whereas before, obviously, you're relying on someone to say that perhaps someone's talking in the auditorium, doing something they shouldn't be doing, and they may or may not report that. At this stage, you can't just rely on customers to come out and tell you that someone sat in the wrong place. So definitely keep an eye on that is critical to remaining open. Thanks, Mark, for raising it.
Nope.
Did it again. There are some additional questions, and unfortunately, we are running low on time, and I don't want to stretch this out too much longer. Everyone's come on stage here and lent their time to this. So there's been questions about the availability of this session. It will be provided by the ICTA, a recording. As to the slides themselves, like the PDF presentations, I believe the answer to that is we're working on it.
Yep.
So, okay, that's the answer.
That's the answer. So we'll work on getting all this information available to everybody, and please feel free to contact your servicer and your manufacturers to fill in any of the missing information that we haven't touched on. And as far as the rest of this, everybody that attends will also be receiving a document with the links that we provided in the presentations, so you have something to take away with you.
Well, thank you so much to Frank and to all the panelists here. Thank you so much to everyone who has attended this panel today. Of course, thank you to Dolby. Thank you to everyone. We appreciate everyone, and it's very important for the community to come together right now.
Yeah,
so.
for sure. And all this will be available on the International Cinema Technology Association webpage or our Facebook page. So when you get a chance, you can go see that. And thanks to Box Office Pro for hosting this.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
I actually don't know how to. Not quite sure how to turn this off. There we go.